This is how to use a drill for beginners. Let's get started. First, we need to understand the basic function of each button and switch on the drill. Keep in mind that your drill could be a little different from mine. The trigger is pretty important. It's what makes the drill spin. The more you squeeze the trigger, the faster the drill will turn. Some drills will have a light like this that turns on each time you press the trigger. This just helps you see what you're doing. Above the trigger is this odd looking switch, which is also pretty important. This switch controls the direction your drill will spin, which is either forward or reverse. And it's usually labeled, so if I push the left side in, my drill will be in reverse and it will turn backwards. This is what you would do when removing screws. But if I push the right side in, the drill will spin forwards, which is what you'll use to drill holes and drive screws. Also, the switch can be right in the middle, and that's just a safety position. It locks the trigger so that the drill does not spin. On top of the drill is the gear switch. Most drills like mine have 2 settings, but others will have 3, and lower end drills won't have the option to change the gear. For reference, 1 is a lower speed with more torque, which is good for driving screws, and 2 is a higher speed, which is better for drilling holes. But for now, until you're more comfortable with the drill, I'd recommend setting it to 1, just to give you a little bit more control until you get the hang of it. This dial with all these numbers is the clutch control. This controls how much torque the drill will use, and you can think of torque as being the drill's muscle. The lower numbers will use less torque, so they'd be better for driving screws that are easy to drive, like smaller screws into soft wood. The higher numbers would be better for driving, let's say, big screws into dense wood like hardwood. The highest setting uses the most torque and is for drilling holes. So if I go past my numbers, my drill has an image of a drill bit. If I set it to this, my drill will give me maximum torque for drilling holes. There's really no exact science to the clutch control, it just really depends on the job that you're doing. Just remember that the numbers are meant for driving screws and the highest setting is for drilling holes. And at the very front we have this super important piece called the chuck. The purpose of the chuck is to hold our drill and driver bits. You'll notice the chuck has these 3 teeth, and depending on which direction you turn the chuck, the distance between the teeth will either be closer or further apart. These 3 teeth are what grab and hold the drill bit. They're just like our fingers. They need to be closer together to tighten down on something thinner like this pencil, but my fingers need to be wider apart to grab onto something thicker like this highlighter. So with that in mind, let's insert a drill bit. A thick drill bit is pretty simple. It will easily center itself in the opening of the chuck. But you'll notice that the teeth are too close together and the bit does not fit. All you have to do is spin the chuck so that the teeth are further apart, like this. Then we can slide the bit into the chuck. And it's a little too loose in there, you don't want your bit moving around. So we'll spin the chuck the opposite direction. The teeth will move closer together and grab the bit. Now this is important. To finish securing the drill bit, you need to grab the chuck and twist it until it can't go any further. You heard mine make a clicking sound. Your drill might not make that sound. What really matters is that you can't turn the chuck any further so that our drill bit is 100% secure. Before I show you how to properly secure a really thin drill bit, I'll show you how to remove this one. Grab the chuck and turn it the opposite direction that you turned it to tighten it. Keep spinning it until the teeth loosen up enough for you to remove your drill bit. And that's it. Now you might need to use a really thin drill bit, like this one. Putting this in the chuck will be similar to the first one that we did, but with a couple of things to look out for. First, I'm going to spin the chuck until the teeth are much closer. Now this section of the drill bit is called the shank. It's what the teeth of the chuck grab and hold onto. You'll notice this smaller drill bit has a shorter shank, and because it's so short, when I insert the bit into the chuck's teeth go past the shank. And if I tighten it right now, the teeth are also grabbing onto the part that drills, this corkscrew part of the drill bit, which is actually called the flute. So, you want to make sure the teeth are only grabbing the shank of the bit. With that in mind, hold the bit with one hand as you turn the chuck so that the teeth grab it. And again, tighten the chuck until you can no longer turn it. When putting the thinner drill bits in, make sure you keep them in the center as you tighten the chuck. Otherwise, they can easily be off center, or you might even tighten them in the teeth if you're not paying attention, which would not let you drill a straight hole. And driver bits are simple to put in. They'll usually center themselves. As long as the 3 teeth of the chuck are grabbing onto the flat sides of the bit, you're good to go. Now I'll show you how to use the drill to properly drill a hole. Then I'll also show you how to drive a screw. First, I'm going to pop in my charged up battery and I'm good to go. I'm going to start by drilling what's called a pilot hole. A pilot hole is simply just the hole that I'm going to drive my screw into. Now, you technically don't always have to make a pilot hole. You could just drive the screw straight into the wood, but it's usually a good idea to drill a pilot hole. There's less of a chance of the wood splitting from the screw, and it's helpful for driving screws in a dense material such as hardwood. To drill the pilot hole, we need to pick a drill bit that's the same diameter as the shaft of the screw that we'll be using. On a screw, the shaft is the solid centerpiece of the screw that the threads wrap around. So we want our drill bit to be that same size. This is easy. All you have to do is take the screw that you're driving and hold it up in front of you. And this drill bit is the perfect size for this screw because it's the same size as the shaft on our screw. When held like this, you want the drill bit to hide the shaft of the screw, but not the threads, because those threads will be responsible for grabbing onto the wood when you drive the screw in, which means you do not want to drill a pilot hole using a bit larger than the screw. Otherwise, the threads of the screw won't be able to grab the wood. But you can get away with using a drill bit that's thinner than the shaft of the screw, as that's still better than not drilling a pilot hole at all. Take the drill bit and put it into the chuck of the drill just like we covered earlier. I'm going to take a pencil and mark the exact spot where I need to drill. I'll turn the clutch control all the way to the drill icon, or put yours on the highest number if you don't have an icon. I'll put my drill bit right where I need to drill. Now I'll squeeze the trigger and make the hole. Once you drill the hole, just continue squeezing the trigger and pull the drill bit straight out, just like that. Here's a few very important tips. When drilling the hole, you don't want to try to force the drill bit by applying too much pressure. You want the drill and the bit to do the work, so apply a little pressure but not a heavy amount. Plus, if you're using a thinner bit, you could easily break the bit in half with enough force, which you definitely don't want. Also, do your best to keep the drill at a right angle to the wood so that you make a straight hole. And always think about what's on the other side of what you're drilling. For example, you don't want to drill through the wood and then into your tabletop. Another thing to be careful for is that your drill bit can get extremely hot after a little drilling, so be cautious when grabbing the bit. It might need to cool down before you try to touch it. And finally, this is a helpful tip if you're worried about drilling too far. If I want to make a pilot hole for this screw, I can hold the screw next to my bit, then I'll put a piece of painter's tape however far up the bit my screw goes. So now, when I drill my pilot hole, once my tape touches the wood, I know I've drilled to the perfect depth for my screw. Okay, we've drilled the pilot hole. Let's put our screw in. I'll remove my drill bit by loosening the chuck. Then I'll get my driver bit, which is the right size for my screw head, and I'll put my driver bit in the chuck and tighten it down. Take the clutch control off of drill. Now, what number we set it to can vary widely. It depends on the material you're driving into, the type of screw, etc. And what I'll do is give you an example of driving this same screw at a few different numbers so that you can see what happens. And just for this example, I'm going to drive straight into the wood without a pilot hole. So I'll start at the lowest number, which is 1. On a setting of 1, the drill can't really drive this particular screw all the way into the wood. And you can hear a clicking sound, which is the clutch slipping. I think setting the clutch control to around 6 should do it, so I'll move it to that. And that was enough torque to drive the screw all the way in. So you might be wondering, why not just use a higher number to get a lot more torque? For this example, I'll move it up to 12, and look what happens. If you're not careful, depending on the screw type and material, you can actually overdrive the screw into the wood like I did, because we used too much torque. Another problem with too much torque is that it can strip the screw head off of softer screws. So if you're not comfortable with setting the clutch control, start with a lower number so that you get lower torque, and then you can move the number up from there if needed. Now that we have a better idea of how the clutch control works, we'll drive our screw. I'll take my screw, line it up with my driver bit, and hold it there. Put the tip of the screw on our pilot hole and start squeezing the trigger, but remember, on most drills, the more you squeeze the trigger, the faster the drill spins. So be controlled when driving the screw. You don't necessarily need the really fast speed like when drilling holes. And remember, hold the drill straight so that the screw goes straight in. And that's it. If you want to remove a screw, set the drill to turn in reverse. Put the bit into the screw head and again squeeze the trigger in a controlled manner, and you can remove the screw. If you're ever uncomfortable with drilling a hole or driving a screw, you can always practice on a scrap piece of wood that you don't need. That way you can get the hang of it. And most importantly, always be safe. I appreciate you listening to me. If this video helped you, please consider giving it a like. Thank you so much for watching.